This is Andy 2, and this is part 2 of removing and installing the hook and positioning finger on a Singer Model 401 and other like 403A, 404, and the Rocketeer 500 and 503. And I want to begin this second part, a little deviation here, where in the comments of part 1 of this two-part series, Matthew talked about that there was not a D-Lint pin on this like he had found on the 500A and 503, and that D-Lint pin on those models was giving him a thread catching problem, and I wasn't familiar with that, but he contacted Terry at tndtrepair.com, who told him that Singer had sent out information about removing that pin, and that fixed the problem. And I've already gotten contact from people about the D-Lint pin. What is it, and so forth. What does it do? So I have a positioning finger from a 500A, and I wanted to show you that and explain the D-Lint pin just a little bit. And if you're not interested in this, just skip ahead in the video here, but this was better for me than making a separate video. But this is the D-Lint pin right here, this little post that sticks up, and I think of it D-Lint like lint remover. See if I can get this put on the hook here, and we'll take a look at it. So when the hook is traveling around, you know, it kind of goes through that positioning pin, positioning finger, and the D-Lint pin, I believe, rides along in here in the hollow curve, and as the hook turns, it was made to sweep out lint, remove the lint, de-lint the hook, to keep the hook kind of semi-clean in there. And I guess it caused some problems with knit and double knit fabrics that had come out shortly after the Rocketeer models were released. So Singer came up with a different threading method and maybe modifying this, and somebody told me they actually came out with a different hook. I'm not sure about that, but let me show you a picture of these two positioning fingers here. So when I started looking at this, you know, I noticed this little hole in this one, which is for my 401A, and otherwise the positioning fingers are about the same thing. So Matthew had mentioned grinding this off, and I don't know if it could be pulled out of this hole. If it's got a hole like that, if it could just be pulled out. But either way, I think Matthew mentioned that he wants to do this on another Rocketeer he has and try and film it, because I guess the thread catching thing was giving him headaches, and he finally resolved it with information from Terry, and I think he plans to share that. And if he does and lets me know, then I'll probably put out a link to it for other people who are interested. So that's the D-Lint pin. That's what I know about it anyway. Okay, so let's go back to reinstalling this hook on the 401 now. If you saw the end of my part 1 where I was cleaning out the top of the bushing where this hook goes into is all very, very mucky and dirty down there. And this is actually a oil port, because the hook shaft does sit in a rather thick bushing, and on the side of the shaft right there, they've cut into the shaft so that it exposes the hole for the oil port, or the little tunnel, and lets oil seep out and then get spread around the shaft in the bushing. And it's not a real deep hole. That gives you an idea how deep it is, you know. But what I found was the hole and what I would call the weep port here was just stuffed full of hardened dust and lint. And I had to soften it up with cleaner and pick it out and flush it out, and especially out of here, I spent a good amount of time poking and used needle in there and loosening it up and flushing it out. And now it's all clear. So it would work normally. So I wanted to mention that because without removing the hook, if you have a noisy hook turning, a lot of people don't even know about oiling this, and that bushing maybe is getting dry and it's spinning in there on a dry bushing and it's getting real noisy. I don't know if you could put extra oil and keep poking and try and flush it through. Perhaps you could just take the gear off and well, you'd almost be removing it then. I was also trying to think, there's a very small space underneath here where it sits on the bushing, and that's where all the muck was, and I even thought about on other machines putting floss through there and like trying to get that out of there. I was really surprised to see that much. But let's take a look up here where the hook is installed, and before we put it in, I'll just show you a few things here. If you see this area here where it sits in, I want to show you a closer picture of these two holes. So this is the hole back here for the post on the positioning finger. That's what sits in. And then if you remember, you go onto the side here under the bottom and you loosen the set screw to get it out. And this is the hole for the hook shaft. And look how thick that brass bushing is. I'm assuming it's brass. And when I cleaned that out, it was pretty dark and dirty in there too. So I finally poked an old t-shirt from the bottom up to the top, and then put a bunch of crud cutter in there and kind of shoe shined it back and forth, and finally got that all cleaned out. So before I would put this hook and positioning finger back in, I would go ahead and put some oil in there just to facilitate the installation, because we can oil it afterwards. And on the inside edges of the positioning finger, I'll show you in a minute here, I just swab this with some oil here. There was so much lint in there, and I guess it had gotten moisture in there before because I had the beginnings of rust inside the positioning finger. So I had to use a little bit of rust remover. See, it kind of sits like this, right? And this whole bottom shelf here was full of really hard impacted lint and dirt that I had to soak away, and I found rusty spots under here. So the product I used, the Must for Rust, got it right off. But between that and all of the muck that was around here, makes me happy that I recommend that you clean your hook area and your tension unit with a vacuum whenever possible. And I am not a proponent of blowing canned air in there, because canned air has moisture in it, and I just see evidence like that slightly damp lint gets blown into these areas. And if you live in a humid climate at all, you know, you can have the potential for rust. So on the bottom here, of course, we have the other end of those two holes or ports for the positioning finger post and for the hook shaft right here. Okay. So that's where we'll be putting this down into. And I've got my set screw for the post backed out a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and just enter or insert the hook and post up, the hook and a positioning finger up here, trying to stay away from the hook point at all times. I'll try and put this back on and get it in position. It's like a little wire puzzle. My friend Terry said it reminded him of wire puzzles he used to work on when he was younger. What am I not? There we go. I was making it too complicated. Okay, so here's my hook down at the bottom, and I'll kind of turn this up to the top here, and I'm just going to just set that set the hook shaft in there first because it's longer, and get it started, and then as it drops down, I'll try and line up the post from the position finger into the hole for it, so that they both drop in together like that. There we go. Keep this hook away. Now they're both seated, right? And the position finger kind of lines itself up. I mean, you can't twist it or anything. You just want to be sure that it's down flat and that the hook is down flat. Okay. Then I'm going to lay the machine on the back here, and see, maybe I'll put my block of wood under there to prop it up a little bit. Try and get a good angle on it here. There we go. So we can see the shaft sticking out here, and the post from the positioning finger just kind of comes down flush to the casting here. Okay, and the first thing I want to do is get the hook gear on there and set, then I can push down the position finger and tighten that set screw. Now, the way that I like to do this, and I'll show you a close-up picture of this, is I want to set my my gear mesh marking, my fingernail polish spot here where I can see it, and I want to rotate this hook so that the flat spot is towards the top but angled a little bit so I can get my screwdriver in there through this little, do you remember this little notch up here that gives you a little bit better access to the set screw. So I want to start out with it set up like that. And of course, if you know me and seen any of my cleaning videos, I'm kind of obsessed with cleaning, I guess is a good word. So I did clean up the gear and get all the old carbon and dead grease, dried grease and lint and everything. And I was able to clean up this gear pretty good without removing it. So with it set up like this, here is my gear marking spot, and I want to go up top here and put your finger on the hook and push it towards the bottom or towards you, and get your hook get the gear started on the shaft and rotated so that it lines up just like that, where my little teeth that I marked are back in their original mesh position. Okay, now if normally I didn't do it here, but normally I would put some grease on this gear. You know, I use this Tri-Flow clear synthetic grease that has the PTFE in it, and I would use a little stiff artist brush and I would paint grease on here, knowing that it will transfer to this gear once it rotates. But I'm not going to do that in the video, but I would take that opportunity to have such a clear shot at it. Okay, so I'm pushing down on my hook up here towards me, and I've got my gear teeth meshed, and I've got my flat spot kind of angled up there, right? So holding the hook in place now so that the flat spot stays there, I'm just going to turn the hand wheel until I can find my set screw, and there it is. Now my set screw is right there. Okay, I've already got the teeth meshed. So I'm just going to take a little lightweight, easy to use screwdriver in here, and let's see, I'm going to turn my hook a little bit to help me line up if I go through the top there, so I can push the gear towards the hook and the hook down towards the gear. I want a nice mesh here. I want to get a nice mesh with these gears. I don't want them squeezed so hard together that they bind and have a hard time turning, but I don't want any play. I don't want the gear to be tightened, you know, away from the other gear so that they're kind of loose and get backlash and sloppy. So just by pushing the hook down, which it must be, and then tapping this gear up to mate with the other gear is usually enough pressure just to gently hold them together. And then I'm going to tighten that set screw slowly but surely to be sure I get it centered on the flat spot of the shaft. And that's real important. You don't want it on the round part of the shaft or partially on that flat spot, because it'll make the gear crooked or wonky, and it won't run smoothly. So just finger tightening that. Now let's see if can you hear that? I've got a little bit of play. I have, to me, too much play. There's too much space between the gears. So I'm just going to rotate this back and check my mesh. Yep, I got the mesh good. So I'm just going to loosen that set screw. I've got it centered on the flat spot, but I'm going to loosen it so that I can push down on the hook and up on the gear a little bit and try and get those gears a little bit closer together. You probably do it right the first time because you're not filming. There we go, that feels better. I was concentrating on talking about the flat spot and I forgot to kind of push together. So let's see, it looks good. Now, see, that's not popping up and down. But when I rotate, it's nice and smooth, even without grease. The mesh is very clean. It's very nice. It's smooth. It's not binding. I didn't squeeze them together too hard, but I've got them up, resting against each other. So that tells me that I'm good, and now I'm going to go in with my more of a regular screwdriver and get in there and get in there, Andy, and tighten that set screw much. Whoop. There we go. It's deeper than you think in there. If that set screw isn't pretty deep, you're not on the flat spot. And now I'm going to tighten that firmly so it doesn't vibrate loose over the years. So back and forth, but not up and down. Good. Now I can come around and I can work. Maybe I'll do it with this little screwdriver first. You can be able to see in there. I'm going to push down on the positioning finger and go in and snug up that set screw. Now there's no flat spot on the positioning finger post because that post doesn't rotate like a shaft and a gear rotates. So you either need a flat spot and one set screw. If there's no flat spot on the shaft, on a rotating shaft, you would normally have two set screws to make sure that the gear would stay on there. And I'm pushing down all the way on that positioning finger because it kind of self-centers itself, and there's no backlash, there's no, spacing or anything. I got it pretty tight with that little screwdriver. Let's go up top and see how we're looking. Okay, let's go up here and see that we have our hook and position finger back in place so that we can put our bobbin case back in on the position finger. And of course it's very dry, but let's go ahead and rotate everything. Yeah, so that's good. Looks great. And I can't lift and bounce the hook, so I've got a good mesh. This is tight. I am going to take this opportunity to oil down in here in the hook oil port, and since I washed everything out and stuff, I'm going to put a few more drops than I normally would, but I want to do some rotation there and get some oil in there on that bushing. And I might do that one or two more times as I'm working on the machine to be sure I get a good oiling of that bushing down there. Normally, on a normal maintenance, when you oil your machine once a week or once a month, or depending on your use, probably just a drop of oil in there after it's cleaned in there. The way I found it, if anybody was putting oil in there, they were just oiling the dirt and the lint. Okay. Now, before I forget, I'll go in up there on that positioning finger set screw and tighten that firmly, because we don't want to have that come loose ever. Whoops. Sorry. And get a nice bear down on that. So we have we've removed and then reinstalled the hook for whatever reason, cleaning or replacing a defective hook, and so forth, and I'm going to bring it back up here. Now, normally when I have done this, I've lost the timing between the needle point and the hook point. So after you do this, that's one thing that you should always check, is check your timing, and do not be surprised. I'm expecting to have to retime this machine, which is good, because now I'll show you how to test it, and I will show you how to reset the timing. And I've always thought that there's maybe some way when you remove and replace, there's some way to do it that you wouldn't lose the timing. Like on a 301, I know how to do that, but I've never really played with these. I've never taken out too many hooks on a slant, class 66 rotating hook type thing. So there may be some way to do it. I've always thought there is, but I usually just check and reset the timing. So in this next segment, I'm going to show you how to do that. All right. Now we're going to check and or set the rotary hook timing, as the chances are pretty good that I've changed it by the work I've done with the hook. And the first part of checking and setting the hook timing is to check and set the height of the needle bar. That has to be set at a certain height, and this should not have changed, but I'm going to kind of show you how to check it and set it in case that's required on your machine. The way to do this is to rotate the hand wheel towards the front of the machine, which means you'd be turning it counterclockwise. And you want to put the needle bar or the needle bar connecting link at the lowest position. So you see it comes down and bottoms out. If I keep rotating, it'll head back up. So I want to find the lowest centered position, and then I'm going to look down here where the needle bar is coming out of the needle bar bushing. On the needle bar there are two engraved bands around it, and they normally kind of look like black lines because there's a little bit of dirt in them. And as a matter of fact, let me show you a picture of those two timing marks or bands on a machine. They're not in any particular timing position, but just where I could get a good picture of them. Okay, so you see those two marks, and the top one is called the height or needle bar height mark, and then below it a little bit is the second timing mark called the timing mark. So with the needle bar down at the lowest position, the top mark or the height mark should be right up against the bottom of the bushing for the needle bar. Now I'm going to show you a picture of this. It's not in the perfect position, but I wanted you to see the bottom of the needle bar bushing with the top mark close to it. So that's how it should be seen down here. Now that top mark, depending on your machine, can be right up against the bushing, starting to kind of disappear into the bushing, or there could be a little crack of silver needle bar showing, a little sliver, we'd call it, of the needle bar between the top mark and the bottom of the bushing. And this really depends on the machine. It can be either one of those or someplace in between, but you should always be able to at least see a portion of the top timing mark. Now on mine, I took a close look at it, and my top timing mark is just barely touching to disappear into the bushing. So I can see most of that mark. Now if you're not in a position like that, if your needle bar is all the way down and you don't see the top timing mark at all, or you have a pretty good gap between the top timing mark and the bottom of the bushing, your needle bar height may be off. And the way that you would adjust that is on the side of the needle bar link coming from the take-up lever system. On the side of it over here is a clamping screw that clamps the needle bar into the link. Now it's practically impossible to get to it when the needle bar is all the way down. This is true on the 403 also, whereas on the 404 it's right straight in the front. It's so easy. I'm really not sure why they did this. They had a reason, I guess. But so if you need to move the needle bar slightly up or down, you're going to have to rotate the hand wheel again to bring that clamp and the set screw up high enough to get a screwdriver on there. Okay, and then you're going to slightly loosen it, just enough so that you can forcibly twist and move the needle bar a little bit up and down. You don't want it real loose because you must lower this back to the lowest position, right? To push it or pull it and get it at the exact timing mark location. And if your needle bar is real loose, when you raise it back up to tighten this, it'll shift. So you have to play around with it. It's kind of a pain in the, you have to loosen it enough that you could kind of twist and force this up or down a little, and then lower it, always turning the hand wheel towards the front of the machine. Lower it back down to the lowest point, and then twist and pull down the needle bar till you can see the top timing mark up near the bushing, or maybe twist and push it up a little bit if that's your case. But once you get the height that you want, you must also line up the needle clamp so that it is going to keep the needle facing the front, right? So you've got your screw that holds the clamp on. On the back side you have your thumb screw to tighten or loosen the needle. You're going to have to kind of eyeball it, is the easiest way to make sure that it's not twisted left or right. Now Singer has a method to put 2 needles in there at the same time and look down at the tips of the needles and make sure they're both the same space from the inside of the hook. And that's the most accurate. So if you want to do that, it's okay. I have found over the years that just taking my time and eyeballing this good to make it square, to make it proper, is just as effective as the 2 needle method. So once I have that positioned correctly and the height correct, I'm going to slowly, gently keep rotating the hand wheel and bring that up to the top so that now I can go in and re-tighten that clamping screw. So now you see why I said just loosen it enough to be able to move the bar. Now hopefully when you brought it back up and tightened it, it didn't slip down. So we're going to bring it back down and we're going to check, right? We're going to say, okay, that's at the bottom, and oh, my top height mark, my top mark up there is perfectly aligned where I want it by the needle bar bushing. So I did a great job. Now I'm going to rotate the hand wheel a tiny bit more, a little bit more, to bring the bottom mark, which is actually the timing mark, up against the bushing where the height mark used to be. The height mark will go up into the bushing and the bottom timing mark will take its place. And now this is important, whatever space your top mark was from the bushing, that's where you want to raise the bottom mark to. So as an example, if the top mark was just barely touching the bushing, when you bring up the bottom, you don't want to see a silver space between the mark and the bushing. That would be a different. You want the bottom mark to come up and stop at the exact height where your top mark was, all things being equal. So let me rotate that. And you really need to get down here and look at this. Some people lay the machine on the back so that they can look from the side and get a real clear view of this. Once you have that in position for the timing, what's supposed to happen here is that the point of your rotary hook is going to be right behind the needle. Now you notice I didn't put a needle in here yet, because I have put a needle in at first, and moving stuff around, the timing was off so bad it bent or broke the needle. So I'm looking here and I want to see the hook point right where my needle point would be, and I can see I'm off. I'm about 3/8 of an inch off. If you were close, you'd want to go ahead and raise the needle bar and put your needle in, and then lower it back down and bring it back up right to, let me look again here, right to the timing mark. And if the needle is if the hook point is right behind the needle, you are timed properly. Okay, so as usually is the case for me, when I do this hook change, I'm not timed, so I'm going to retime it. I'm pretty close, so I'm going to go ahead and put my needle in. And this is a number 18. It's a size 18. 15x1, size 18. That's the size Singer recommends for checking and setting the timing. And that's the most accurate. If you don't have a size 18 needle, use the biggest size that you have, a 16 or a 14. But the most accurate by tiny amounts is going to be a size 18. And you know the flat spot here goes to the back. So, and you want a new needle if you have it. You don't, or at least test your needle on a flat surface and make sure it's not bent. Okay? Nothing like timing a machine to a bent needle, finishing your project, and then on your next project you've lost your timing and can't figure out why. Okay, so I'm going to lower this back down, and careful that I don't strike. If you're hitting the hook or the positioning finger, you've done something wrong with the installation. Okay, and my low spot, I'm going to bring it back up to the timing mark, and I'm going to look very close here, and my hook point is way over here to the side. It's not behind the needle. Okay, let me rotate it till it is behind the needle. Right there. But that hook point behind the needle point has to be when your timing mark is set properly. So my timing's off. Okay. I hope that made sense. And you know what? At the end of the video here, I'm going to put some, in the last 20 seconds, I can put links. So I'm going to put a link to like a needle bar height video and a needle bar or a hook timing video. Okay, hopefully that will help you if you're having a problem. If the student doesn't understand, blame the teacher. So if I'm not making any sense, then I'll give you some videos to look at that go into more detail. Now, surprisingly, you don't do anything else here for the timing. All the timing is done over at this gear. And that's because you have to break the link between the hand wheel, needle bar combination, and the hook. Because we're going to set the needle bar at that perfect height for the timing. We're going to loosen this gear so everything here can be turned without turning that whole vertical shaft or the hand wheel or moving the needle. And that break that you do is right here. Okay, now this gear is on a round shaft because we have to adjust it. We have to move it around to get our timing. So a flat spot and one set screw won't work. Let me show you a picture of one of the set screws. Okay, now I'm going to rotate this, and let's see, let me go the other way. You'll see the other set screw. Okay, so there's 2 set screws. So we've got to loosen both of those, and then we have to make sure that we can rotate the hook, or this side, without moving the gear or this side. That's the goal here. So let me go in here. I've talked before at length about stubborn set screws, penetrating oil, heat from like a hairdryer. Some people told me they use a heat gun. I don't have one of those. Patience is a good key. You don't want to break the top of that set screw. Real hard to get out then. Also, if you have a little ratchet or a wrench that you can put your screw into, you can also put your bit or screwdriver in there and start turning it, and if it's not going to come out, then what you want to do is, while you're turning it some, you start tapping. Like that. That can help break it free also. Okay, so what I usually do, like if I know I'm going to be taking apart a machine for cleaning, like tomorrow, sometime today, I'll come and kind of spray these areas with a penetrating oil. You know, I've been using the same can of WD-40 for 5 years. It doesn't take much, but I'll spray areas like the needle bar and presser bar and the set screws and things like that, and then I'll just let it sit overnight, and that's usually enough. If you have trouble, try those other methods that I showed. Now we're going to loosen both of these, as I think I already said, and just need them a good turn or two. I can get in here and there we go. And I'll just rotate that to the other one, and we'll get that loose. Now, that was a little easier. Go. Now we want to see if we can now turn the hook independent of this gear. So I can actually try and turn this. There. See how all this is turning. It's all turning until the gear, but the gear's not turning. And that's what I want to be able to do. If your gear is stuck to the shaft, you can, where's my little screwdriver? You can try and gently go between the bushing and the gear and make it move a little bit. There, now see, I can back and forth. Watch out, the gear teeth are sharp. Worst case, I've had to back out one of the screws all the way and rotate it up and kind of fill the hole with a penetrating oil and let that sit for a while, or use heat to soften things up. But you have to get it to the point where you can turn the hook freely without moving the gear or changing the needle height position. Okay, so we've got that set. And yep, we have to go back up now and do a setting of the needle bar at the timing mark. Okay, so where I came down all the way, and now I'm going to turn it a little bit so the bottom mark is up where I want it by that bushing. Okay, that's my correct height for the needle bar. Now I need to keep that needle bar there. I don't want it moving around while I'm turning the machine and moving the hook and stuff. So we'll take our special needle bar hold in position tool. I'm going to go ahead and put that down, and that's a rubber band. And I'm going to wrap it around the thumb nut of the needle clamp, stretch it out, and I'm going to wrap it a couple times around the needle bar and the pressure bar. See, and I just to hold that needle bar in position. And then the end, can I go one more? Oh, that's going to be too tight. Then the end, I'm going to wrap around that thumb screw again. So now, you know, I could turn the hand wheel and make this move, but just me moving the machine around isn't going to change the height. And just to be sure that I didn't change the height, I'm going to go up here again and look one more time. And if I have moved it a little bit, putting the rubber band on, I can adjust it. Okay, now the idea is I want to move the hook point right behind that needle point. Okay, and my hook still moved a little bit, but not much. I don't know how far I'll be able to zoom in here. I'll try. It's still a pretty clear picture. I want to get that hook point, the very tip of the hook point, right behind the needle. I don't want it sticking out past the needle, and I don't want to see it before. So if the point is behind the needle and you can't see it past the needle, that is the sweet spot. Sometimes a LED flashlight really helps out. Okay. I think I'm good right there. Now sometimes I've laid the machine on the back. Let me show you. And stood up over the machine looking down at the hook point and needle point. And when I get it in position, then I'm all set to tighten one of these gears, or one of the set screws. Okay. Now when you do this, hopefully one of your set screws will be in a position that you can get to with a screwdriver tip. And then you do not want the hub or base of the gear rubbing against the bushing. You want this space here. And you want this gear over resting against the gear on the vertical shaft, so you get a nice mesh. Again, not pressed together so hard that they bind, but you don't want a gap. So I will usually just put a little blade in there and just kind of wiggle that over, or you can nudge it with your finger, thumb, and get it up against the other gear, and then I'm going to tighten that set screw, snug it up. Not 100% tight, but I'm going to snug it up because I want to rotate this now to get to the other gear, right? And where is that other gear? I don't know which way it is. So now when I turn the hand wheel, everything's going to be moving. And that's what you want. But if you tighten one set screw 100%, when you go to tighten the other set screw, the gear might end up a little crooked on the shaft, uneven on the shaft. So just snug it up enough so that you can rotate the gear gently. Now you see the other set screw, and this one you want to go ahead and tighten up 100%. I'll snug it up, and then I'll give it that final bear down tightening firmness. I'll go back to my first set screw and now finish tightening that up. And that's the best way I know. If you've ever changed a flat tire and had to put the lug nuts on the wheel, you don't tighten, you kind of finger tighten them all, and then you tighten nut 1, 5, 2, 4, 3, 6, something like that, so that they're evenly. The same principle with this. Now let's look at this. You didn't do anything to change the mesh because you didn't separate these gears. So they still have the factory mesh, and we want to whoops, my stop motion screw is a little bit off. We want to set this up, and we're going to take off our needle bar placement holder rubber band. And let's just first turn it slowly and make sure our needle's not hitting anything. Okay, there's a couple of full revolutions, and it didn't. And it's turning smoothly. I don't feel any binding. Turn it 2 or 3 times around, and every place it doesn't hang up any place, it doesn't get a little stiff. Every turn feels nice and smooth. So that's what we want. That kind of tells me I've got a good mesh. So I'm going to bring the needle bar down and then keep rotating it back up to that bottom timing mark up against my bushing, and then I'm going to look closely. Whoops, there went my spare position finger. I'm going to look closely down in here, and I see the hook point is behind the needle, and it's not poking past. So that tells me I've got a good timing. Okay, so that is checking and setting the timing. If you ever have to or want to do that. Like if you pull the needle bar out to clean it, put it back in, you have to set the height of the needle bar, but you should not have to retime the machine. Now, for the rest of this video, I'm going to show putting all the parts back that I took off for those of you who would like to see that. I'm also going to give a couple of oiling pointers for this area of the machine. If you're not interested in that, you still may want to skip ahead to the last 20 seconds of the video where I'll put a link to the playlist of all the videos for the 401, and I'll on a similar machine that I show about setting the needle bar height if you want more information, or about setting the timing if you want more information. Okay. So that choice is yours. If you're going to skip to the end or say goodbye, thanks for watching. And if you're going to hang in here and do some little bit more work, we'll get started with that. Since this is my last number 18 needle, I'm going to take it out and save it. I have it in a little skinny test tube thing with a piece of cotton marked number 18, marked timing needle. So I'm sure I have a good needle for timing. And sometimes it's easier to put these parts back in without the needle in there. The first thing I'm going to want to put back is my feed dog. And I didn't necessarily clean this up very much because I'm going to take the machine apart for my own reasons later and you know, wash it in the shower and everything like that. But I will clean out. There's so much lint, and I'm usually going to put the feed dog back in first, right? And let's see. Sometimes, usually when I do that, I'm going to take one of these little interdental brushes for cleaning your teeth, and I'm going to put a drop of oil on there, and I'm going to oil the two little holes for the feed dog screws just to help them go in easier. Get some oil on here and help them come out easier someday if they ever need to. So I'll just go in and brush a little oil like that. Okay, get my feed dog up here. Now you can get the feed dog on a little bit crooked, and the way that you do that is you tighten one set screw all the way and then tighten the other. Let's see if I can get these kind of in here and started with my fingertips. Just like putting set screws, two set screws on the gear for that round shaft, you want to kind of do this the same way. You want to get them mostly tightened equally, and then make sure that the screws are sitting flat in the indentation of the feed dog. Because first time I put one of these on, I didn't realize I finally got the screw in. It's, you know, it's not an easy reach back here with a screwdriver, and I tightened it all the way, and then I got the other one and put my needle clamp back on, and I just had a terrible racket when I started sewing. And what I finally figured out was that the feed dog was crooked, and it was scraping against the side of the needle plate. And that's when I learned to put these screws for the feed dog on more evenly. Yeah, I always have trouble with this. Sometimes I turn the machine around and do this from behind. Let me try just with the tip of the bit of the screw here, see if I can get them started in there. Once I get them in there, that little mini ratchet I have really is great for doing the final tightening or the first loosening of them. But this is something you don't do that often, you know. Maybe, oops, maybe if you had to do it every time you sewed, you'd figure out a better way to get in there. It always seems like the presser bar is in the way. You know, I could edit this out, but I want people who haven't done it or are not familiar with it to see, you know, if you struggle with it, you are not the only person. I've taken off, I don't know, 100 or more feed dogs, you know, and they're still tricky. So with my little mini ratchet here now, I'm going to just, again, snug up that screw. Just tighten it until it first stops turning. Matter of fact, I can just turn it with my fingertips. You'll see it raise up and level out. See if I can get over on this other screw. Come from the back side maybe, yeah. What a pain, huh? And I want to get it in there most of the way. And then I wiggle the feed dog around, you know, to make sure I've got it flat to the feed dog lifter where the holes are, and that I don't have a screw sitting up on the edge of the hole down in there or something like that. Okay, so see, it still can move a little bit, and I think I've got it pretty good here. So I'm going to go back to my one on the right there and give it a pretty good tightening. Remember, these screws can be a little bit soft, so you always want a good fitting screwdriver or tip, and just work slowly. Okay, those feel nice and snug, and both screws are flat down in the hole, which is another good sign that I put it on evenly. Okay, we'll find out once we put the needle plate back on there. I think the next thing I'm going to do is put in the bobbin case positioning bracket here, and this goes, if you remember when I took it out, it goes over this little screw head, and under the bed of the machine there's a steel spring screwed on, and this little slanted tip goes under that spring, and that's what puts pressure on this. So I'm going to take this opportunity to put a drop of oil on the bottom and the top of this arm, so that not only will it go in easily, but when I go to move it later for cleaning and so forth. And remember, try not to push on the little spring part right here. So I'm just going to get it at an angle a little bit above that screw, and I'm going to start pushing it down and under that spring. And then in the working position right there, I'm going to see how it's really springy, it's snappy. See how that wants to stay right there. So I think I got that in properly. So let me lift it up, and I'm going to put the bobbin case back in. Now the bobbin case sits on the hook race, that little shelf around the inside. And with this up, I'm going to put the fork on that positioning finger, the whole reason for that positioning finger. And then I'm going to swing the bobbin case to the left onto the race and push the positioning bracket against it. then if I can rotate the hand wheel and the hook, you see how it's nice and smooth, it's not jumping around. Now I want to oil that. So right here, let's see if I can, which one of these things do I turn? This one. Right behind that little spring, you can see the hook race in this little opening. And that's where Singer says to put a drop of oil once in a while. So I'm going to come down there and put a drop of oil right there, and then I'll just turn the hand wheel, and I might put another drop because I cleaned and scrubbed all those pieces so they were literally bone dry. A little more oil in there. I got a drop on that bracket. Let me wipe up the excess. Nice. Okay. Beautiful. I think the next thing that I'm going to put on is the bed slide, or the bobbin case slide, or the bobbin case cover plate. That's going to be next. Okay, let's get the slide plate back on here. You may want to take a small screwdriver like this, or a toothpick, or a brush, and clean out. Sometimes the opening here for the spring can get crudded up pretty good and full of lint and stuff like that. So since I got it off, I'll just clean it out, and then I'll take my oil and just run a drop inside each side there. Doesn't need a lot of oil in there. Brush that in a little bit. I think that's good. And I'll run just get a drop on the tip of my tube, and without squeezing, just run along the side rails here, so I'll keep it good. I'm going to turn my hand wheel so that my feed dog goes into a low position, and I'm going to turn my plate position lever down, which is going to lower those throat plate pins. And then starting up above the spring is how you put this on, because the ends up at the top end of it are pinched. There's no slot. That's what keeps it from falling off the machine when you pull it. So if you start up above this little spring here and bring it down, you just lift the back end a little. You can sneak a screwdriver or a toothpick or something into the edge of it and put the spring edge into that groove that we oiled. And then you can do the other side and get it started in there, and then just slide it on. So that way it stops when you open, and it slides easy for you. Now, with that feed dog in a low spot, I will open, find my needle plate here. Yeah, we'll put the needle plate on. I'm going to go ahead and open the throat plate all the way to the left, the plate positioning bracket, which is the unlock position, which, boy, those could use some cleaning. And while that's up, I'm going to put a drop of oil just on the edge of just on the edge around the pin. See, this aluminum casting is part of the body, and the pin is in that hollow tube, and inside the lifter, there is some little pins too. I don't worry about those too much, but just on the edge of that opening, so some oil will get down in there, and then I can work it down, and it'll you know, gravity will take it down in there. I've got a video about removing the whole bracket and all this and cleaning it and adjusting it and stuff. But with the feed dog lowered and the pins raised up, we're going to go behind it again, is how Singer says to take it on and off, and slide that in so that these, see these little cutouts are what the lifter pins grip. So we'll just slide it into that, and we'll first lower it halfway into the up position and then all the way to down, and we want to make sure that it seats flat all the way around. Now that I have my needle plate on, I'm going to turn the hand wheel and watch my feed dog to be sure I got it straight. If I didn't, it might scrape on these openings. Sweet, no problem. We did a good job, didn't we? We're all set. And then of course I put my needle back in and so forth. So that's the end of how to remove and reinstall the hook and the throat plate position bracket. I guess I could put my presser foot thumb screw back on and get my multi-purpose foot. I didn't clean that. I need to clean the whole machine. Get that back on. And when you're not using the machine, it should be lowered, that foot, on a scrap of fabric or something. The reason that you want to keep it lowered when it's not in use is that there's two springs involved there. One is in the top of the presser bar itself that puts this tension, and there's another, when you lift this, there's a tension releasing lever that pushes on a little spring back in here, and then actually the third spring would be the beehive spring inside your tension unit. So if you leave your foot up all the time, you're just putting constant pressure on those three springs, and you don't want to do that. So you just put a makeup remover cotton, you know, or a piece of scrap fabric just to protect your feed dogs from wear. That's the only reason you do that. Sometimes if I have an old spool pin felt that I've replaced, that makes a good little piece of padding for that. So I want to thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you maybe saw something you didn't see before, or you learned something that you didn't know before, or at least that you were entertained at the very least. And oh yeah, before I go, I want to apologize. I know that there's some people out there that have a burning question, and I know I'll maybe get some comment or email about it, and I failed to mention this in the first part of this two-part series. But the nail polish cover is 405 Coral Reef, and this particular brand is Sally Hansen Hard as Nails Extreme Wear. So I know somebody wondered, oh, that's a nice looking nail polish. What color is that? So it is 405 Coral Reef. There you go. Can't say that my videos aren't all-inclusive and complete with facts. Take care. Thanks again. See you next time.